October 21st, 1931. At the request of President Herbert Hoover, the lights across America suddenly faded into a somber, nationwide silence. From the skyscrapers of Manhattan to the streets of Chicago, the world plunged back into the ancient darkness it had known for millennia. This was not a failure of technology. It was a final, authoritative salute to the man who banished the night forever. Thomas Edison was dead. To understand the modern world, we must return to the flickering shadows of the past and meet the wizard who truly brought us the light. Thomas Alva Edison entered a world of flickering candlelight and horse-drawn carriages on February 11th, 1847. Born in Milan, Ohio, and later moving to Port Huron, Michigan, he was the seventh and final child of a middle-class family. While his early schooling was disastrous, his teacher famously labeled him addled. His mother, Nancy, recognized the brilliant intelligence lurking beneath his quiet exterior. She pulled him from the classroom, choosing to educate him herself. This decision unleashed a curiosity of mind that would soon find its first true outlet on the iron tracks of the American frontier. By the age of 12, the young Edison was already a practitioner of the American self-made spirit. He secured a job as a newsboy on the Grand Trunk Railroad, traveling daily between Port Huron and Detroit. Most children his age were content to merely trade in papers and snacks. Edison was different. He saw the train not just as a workplace, but as a mobile headquarters for his vast curiosity. He convinced the conductor to let him set up a chemical laboratory in a corner of the baggage car. Between stops, while the locomotive thundered across the Michigan landscape, Edison was deep in the thrill of scientific experimentation. He was surrounded by glass vials, sulfuric acid, and phosphorus. This was a child who refused to accept the boundaries of a traditional life, preferring the dangerous thrill of discovery over the safety of the parlor. But chemistry was not his only obsession. Edison recognized the power of information in a fast-changing nation. Around the time that the American Civil War was brewing, he purchased a small second-hand printing press. He installed it in the same baggage car alongside his chemicals. At just 14 years old, he began publishing the Grand Trunk Weekly Herald. This was the first newspaper in history to be written, printed, and sold on a moving train. It was diligent labor that earned him both prestige and a handsome profit. He interviewed engineers and analyzed the latest telegraphic news, providing passengers with a direct line to the world outside the carriage. He was already becoming a prominent figure in his small world, a boy whose work ethic matched the iron and steam rhythm of the industrial age. But the life of a self-made prodigy is rarely without its cruel twists. The fragile equilibrium of his train car sanctuary was about to be shattered. During one particularly rough stretch of track, a stick of phosphorus fell from a shelf and ignited on the wooden floor. The baggage car was instantly engulfed in a terrifying chemical fire. The conductor, a man who possessed little patience for a teenager's dangerous experiments, was furious. He extinguished the flames, but the damage was absolute. Legend has it that the conductor struck Edison so hard on the side of the head that it began the deafness that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Whether that blow was literal or metaphorical, the result was the same. Edison was unceremoniously thrown off the train, his vials smashed and his printing press silenced. He stood on the desolate platform, a 14-year-old boy who had lost everything in a single smoking instant. But in the mid-19th century, the American underdog did not stay down for long. This failure was not an end, but a transition. He had learned to sell. He had learned to write. Most importantly, He had learned that the world of the laboratory was far more intoxicating than the schoolroom. The boy who caused a fire in a baggage car was now a wandering spirit. He was ready to find his next sanctuary in the clicking binary language of the telegraph. In August 1862, a split-second act of bravery redefined the trajectory of Thomas Edison's life. He pulled 3-year-old Jimmy McKenzie from the path of a runaway boxcar. The boy's father, a grateful station master, offered to reward the teenager with an education in the most vital technology of the mid-19th century, the telegraph. This was the gateway to a broader world. Edison was no longer just a boy selling newspapers. He was now learning to manipulate the very pulse of the nation's information. He spent months mastering the rhythmic click of Morse code, often practicing 18 hours a day. By the time he was 16, Edison had become a tramp telegrapher. He was a wandering spirit, drifting between cities like Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Louisville. He carried his worldly possessions in a small bag, but his mind was heavy with questions about authority and mechanics. His restless nature often led to significant professional instability. Edison was frequently fired, not for a lack of skill, but for his constant tinkering. He would often neglect his duties to conduct unauthorized experiments on the company's equipment. Consequently, he lived in a state of humble poverty, moving from one low-paying job to another. But this period was a valuable school of practical experience. He was learning how things broke and how they could be improved. In 1869, Edison arrived in Boston determined to transition from a technician to a professional inventor. He secured his first patent for an electronic vote recorder. It was designed to allow legislatures to count votes in an instant. It was a masterpiece of logic and efficiency. He traveled to Washington, D.C., brimming with the arrogance of a young man who believed he had solved a fundamental problem of democracy. He presented the machine to a congressional committee. Instead, he was met with a somber and cold rejection. A chairman of the committee told him plainly that if there was any invention on earth they did not want, it was his. The politicians preferred the slow manual tallying of votes to allow for debate and political maneuvering. Speed was an obstacle, not a virtue. The failure was absolute. Edison had spent months of labor on a machine that worked perfectly but had no market. It was a brutal lesson in the pragmatic reality of American capitalism. This rejection provided the core philosophy that would govern his entire career. He walked away from Washington with a solemn vow. He swore he would never again waste time on an invention that no one wanted to buy. From that moment on, his scientific curiosity was tethered to a ledger. He realized that a patent was only as valuable as its commercial application. This shift in mindset transformed the restless tinkerer into a shrewd businessman. He was no longer just looking for the truth. He was looking for a customer. He began to focus on the mechanics of existing systems, looking for ways to make them more profitable. This was the birth of the Edison method, where innovation was driven by the market. He moved to New York City in 1869, penniless and sleeping in the basement of a gold indicator company. When their machinery broke down during a crisis, Edison was the only one with the technical skill to fix it. He was rewarded with a high-paying position, and soon after, he sold an improved stock ticker for $40,000. This was a staggering sum for a man who had been a wandering pauper just months before. It confirmed his belief that the ultimate judge of an invention was the checkbook of the consumer. The wandering boy from Michigan was gone. In his place was a master of the industrial age, ready to turn the language of the telegraph into a financial empire. The lesson of the useless vote recorder had become the foundation of his future legend. He had mastered the machine, but more importantly, he had mastered the market. In 1876, fueled by the massive profits of his earlier stock ticker success, Edison sought a place to house his increasingly complex operations. He moved away from the chaotic urban center of Newark. He established a rural sanctuary in Menlo Park, New Jersey. This was the first of its kind, a dedicated industrial research laboratory and invention factory. Edison's vision was one of sheer productivity. He promised the world a minor invention every 10 days and a major breakthrough every 6 months. This was an ambitious and staggering workload. He gathered a diverse team of practitioners, machinists, chemists, draftsmen. They became known as his muckers. Together, they engaged in a state of perpetual, intense labor. They often ignored the traditional schedules of the 19th century. Around the time he was attempting to improve the telephone, Edison stumbled upon a concept that would redefine human experience. He was experimenting with a stylus that could indent paper tape to record telegraph messages. He noticed that at high speeds, the vibrations produced a rhythmic sound. It was a moment of sharp, sudden insight. He realized that if sound could be recorded as physical indentations, it could be played back. In December 1877, he presented a crude device to his staff, a rotating cylinder wrapped in thin tin foil. He began to turn the crank. With a somber focus, he leaned toward the mouthpiece. He spoke a few simple lines. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. The room fell into an absolute suffocating silence. Edison adjusted the needle. He began to turn the crank again. From the vibrations of the tin foil, his own voice emerged. It was thin and scratchy, but it was unmistakable. For the first time in human history, the spoken word had been immortalized. Consequently, the news of this talking machine swept through the nation like a wildfire. The public was gripped by a sense of staggering disbelief. To many, this was not mere technology. It was magic. The press rushed to New Jersey to witness the miracle for themselves. They found a man with soot on his face and a defiance in his eyes. They gave him a nickname that would secure his reputation for eternity. The Wizard of Menlo Park. In the late 19th century, the American public was fast changing. They were beginning to view scientific breakthroughs as a new form of divinity. Edison was the high priest of this new religion. But the wizard was not a man to rest on his laurels. His arrogance was tempered by his unyielding work ethic. He knew that the phonograph was merely the first miracle. He was already contemplating a much larger problem. The world was still a place governed by the gloomy limitations of the candle and the kerosene lamp. He had mastered sound. Now he wanted to master the light itself and change the face of the earth forever. By 1878, the Wizard of Menlo Park had set his sights on a challenge that many believed was physically impossible: lighting the world without the soot of kerosene or the flickering danger of gas. While arc lights already existed, they were far too bright and dangerous for the domestic parlor. Edison sought the holy grail of the industrial age, a durable, high-resistance incandescent lamp. Around the time he secured the financial backing of J.P. Morgan and the Vanderbilt family, he launched a global hunt for the perfect filament. This was not a stroke of sudden genius, but a grueling siege of relentless labor. He dispatched agents to the jungles of the Amazon and the highlands of Japan. They tested over 6,000 different materials, from coconut fiber and cedar bark to fishing line and even the hair from a colleague's beard. Every failure was recorded with a cold, analytical precision. Edison famously remarked that he had not failed. He had simply found 10,000 ways that would not work. Consequently, The laboratory at Menlo Park became a hive of frenetic activity, running 24 hours a day. In October 1879, the breakthrough finally arrived. A simple piece of carbonized cotton thread was placed inside a glass vacuum bulb. When the current was applied, the thread did not incinerate. It glowed with a soft, steady light. The death watch began. Edison and his muckers sat in a somber, suffocating silence, watching the tiny sliver of fire. It burned for 13.5 hours. This was the moment the night was conquered. Unfortunately, the bulb was only half the battle. To sell the light, Edison had to build the world's first central power grid. He moved his operations to the heart of the American financial machine, Manhattan. He spent the next 3 years in a state of exhausting labor. He was digging trenches under the streets of New York to lay miles of heavy copper wiring. He was battling the deep skepticism of city officials and the resistance of competing gas companies. On September 4th, 1882, the world changed forever. At the Pearl Street station, Edison stood before a massive dynamo. With a decisive gesture, he signaled his chief engineer to throw the master switch. Instantly, the offices of the New York Times and the financial houses of Wall Street were bathed in a brilliant electric glow. This was the ultimate triumph of the self-made man. The flickering shadows of the past were replaced by the steady artificial pulse of the future. Edison had not just invented a bulb, he had created the infrastructure of modern civilization. The rise of Wall Street as a global financial titan was now irrevocably tethered to the power of electricity. He had banished the darkness from the city that never sleeps. But even as he stood in the light of his greatest achievement, a new and more formidable conflict was already looming. A battle over the very nature of electricity itself. A battle that would pit the wizard against his most brilliant and dangerous rival and threaten to destroy everything he had built. By the late 1880s, the map of American industry was being redrawn. Thomas Edison reigned as the king of light. His direct current system was the gold standard for the financial houses of Wall Street. But a new dangerous challenge was emerging from the shadows. George Westinghouse and the radical genius Nikola Tesla were promoting alternating current. This was a system capable of powering entire cities from a single plant. It was efficient, it was cheaper, and it threatened to make Edison's localized DC grid obsolete. Edison was a man of immense arrogance. He had built his empire on the bedrock of direct current. He could not accept the idea of a superior system. Consequently, he abandoned the laboratory for the arena of propaganda. The Wizard of Menlo Park launched a smear campaign that remains a dark stain on his reputation. He did not seek to improve his own system. He sought to demonize the competition. Edison labeled alternating current a killing current. He claimed it was far too dangerous for the domestic parlor. To prove his point, he engaged in a series of shocking ethical violations. His associates held public demonstrations where they electrocuted animals using AC power, dogs, horses, even cattle. This was not science. It was a theater of fear designed to manipulate the public mind. The conflict reached a terrifying climax with the invention of the electric chair. Edison secretly consulted on the project. He insisted the machine use Westinghouse's alternating current. He wanted the word Westinghouse to be forever synonymous with execution. It was a ruthless, cold-blooded maneuver. But for the first time in his life, Edison was fighting a losing battle against logic. While he was busy with ruthless tactics, the market was fast changing. Alternating current was proving its worth across the country. The strategy of his rivals paid off. Westinghouse secured the contract to power the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. The triumph was absolute. Edison's own investors, led by J.P. Morgan, lost patience with his stubbornness. In 1892, they orchestrated a massive corporate coup. Edison General Electric was merged with another firm to create General Electric. Edison's own name was unceremoniously stripped from the company he had founded. He was a titan who had been sidelined by his own arrogance. He had saved the world from darkness, but in his desperate fight for control, he had allowed his own shadow to take over. The war of currents was over. The wizard had lost. Despite losing control of General Electric, Thomas Edison's drive did not wane. He retreated to his laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey. He turned his attention to the potential of storage power. For 10 long years, he obsessed over the nickel-iron alkaline battery. He performed thousands of experiments. He faced thousands of failures, but he refused to accept the idea of defeat. This was pure persistence in its rarest form. He eventually created a power source so durable it is still used in heavy industry today. Around this time, Edison formed one of the most historic partnerships in American history. He found a kindred spirit in Henry Ford. Ford was the man who put the nation on wheels. Ford viewed Edison as his primary hero. Together, these two giants became the face of the American industrial machine. They represented the self-made spirit that defined the early 20th century. In their final years, they embarked on a critical mission to secure the nation's future. They sought a domestic source of rubber to end dependence on foreign imports. Edison analyzed over 17,000 different plants. He eventually found a viable source in the common goldenrod. Even in his 80s, his intellect was focused on the next breakthrough. Edison was more than an inventor. He was a scholar of failure. He famously stated that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. He understood that the path to the light was paved with flickering shadows. He did not fear the darkness. He simply worked until it was gone. On October 18th, 1931, the Wizard of Menlo Park finally fell silent. He was 84 years old. He held a staggering 1,093 patents. His shadow across history is not one of darkness, but of brilliant illumination. He did not just invent the bulb. He invented the modern way of life. Thomas Edison was a man of immense arrogance and incredible vision. He was a complex titan who chose to carry the world on his shoulders. But was he a selfless hero of progress, or a ruthless businessman who sacrificed everything for the win? Perhaps the answer lies in the very light that surrounds you right now. What do you think of the man who banished the night? Was his legacy worth the cost of the War of Currents? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the figures who built our world. See you in the next profile. Have a good day.